Hey guys! So, I was asked to make this video as a summary of Starling forces and the way that they work, because this can be a really difficult topic, but it is a very high yield one for boards. So, I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible. So, to start off, at the bottom of the whiteboard, we can see the net exchange pressure equation. We have the filtration constant is multiplied by the sum of the capillary hydrostatic pressure plus the interstitial oncotic pressure minus the plasma oncotic pressure plus the interstitial fluid hydrostatic pressure. So this can all sound like a mouthful, and it can be a bit much and really hard to understand. So the way I like to think of it is there's really two things that are going on. There's two pressures to focus on, and there's two ends of a capillary to focus on. So let's start by not even talking about the pressure. Let's just think about what we need to happen in a capillary normally. So when our heart pumps, we go to arterioles, and in the middle we have kind of the arteriolar end, the capillary, the venous end. This is what we want to happen. We want, at the arteriolar end, for all of our fluid to come out of our capillary into the interstitium where our tissues can pick it up and they can get the oxygen and the nutrients that they need. Then once we move towards the end of the capillary and we're at the venous end, we've gotten all our nutrients and we need to get rid of our waste. So we want all the fluid to be moving from the interstitium back into the capillary and out of the body. That is our ultimate goal. So we can see that that's what happens. Our pressures end up pushing out at our arteriolar end and pushing in at our venous end. So really, when we think about these pressures, we need to think of them in terms of two things. We have hydrostatic pressure and oncotic pressure. And hydrostatic pressure can be both in the capillary and in the interstitium, just like oncotic pressure. It can be both in the capillary and in the interstitium. But no matter what, those pressures are always doing the same thing. For example, hydrostatic pressure, I think of it, it starts with hydro. So it has to do with fluid. It has to do with the pressure of the fluid in the capillaries, or it has to do with the pressure of the fluid in the interstitium. So let's start off. We're going to zoom in right here. We see our plasma hydrostatic pressure. And what's it going to do? It's going to push fluid out of the capillary. It's going to push fluid away from it, because that's what hydrostatic pressures always do. They push fluid away from them. Now if we go over here, we see right here is our plasma interstitial pressure. And the thing about it is this is in our interstitium, and it's producing hydrostatic pressure that is pushing fluid away from it and back into the capillary. So our next time of pressure is going to be oncotic pressure. Oncotic pressure, I like to think of the O looking like a little particle, because it's about particles, not fluid. And the O looks like a big open mouth of a vacuum. So it is a sucking pressure. So the ultimate goal of it is to suck fluid towards itself. So if we look at the here, interstitial oncotic pressure, it is sucking fluid out of the capillary towards itself. And then if we go over here at the venous end and we see the plasma oncotic pressure, it is also sucking fluid towards itself, only it's back into the capillary. So now when we look at these forces in the net exchange pressure, we can see that we have the two pressures that force fluid out or cause fluid to be exchanged, minus the two forces that cause fluid to go back into the capillary, be reabsorbed, and not be exchanged. So we have our forces at our arteriolar end that make fluid come out, and our forces at our venous end that make fluid go in. And as long as you remember, if it's hydrostatic pressure, it's going to push fluid away, and if it's oncotic, it's going to suck fluid toward, then you're not going to get messed up. Alright, so now that we've talked about this, we need to talk about specific examples. Our first example is us widening, as you see here, this arteriolar end. So if you get arteriolar dilation, well, what's going to happen? It means you're going to have even more fluid that's able to go through. And what did we say fluid contributes to? Well, remember, hydro, fluid. Oncotic is particles. We get more blood, so that means more fluid. So we get more pushing pressure, right? So what we see is the PC right here is going to go up, right? So if it's going to go up, it's a pushing pressure. What's it going to do? It's going to push fluid out. So when we dilate at our arteriolar end, we end up with more fluid going out and therefore end up with more edema. Okay, by the same token, if we look in this example, we're at our venous end, we have a venous clot. So when we have a clot, the fluid can't go through, so it's going to back up into our capillary system. So we have extra fluid. Remember what we said, fluid pushes. Where's that fluid backing up? Inside the capillary. So the fluid pressure that's going to go up is our capillary hydrostatic pressure, which is going to force fluid out into the interstitium. So once again, this is another way we can get edema. Some other examples would be congestive heart failure. Remember how when we dilated our arterioles, we saw more fluid going through. And when we had a venous thrombus, we saw fluid sitting still. When we have congestive heart failure, what we end up with is a lot of fluid that is congested in our vasculature. When you get more fluid, that adds to that hydrostatic pressure inside the capillary and pushes more out. So what we end up with is edema. From the other side of it, we now have to think about our oncotic pressure. The number one thing that contributes to oncotic pressure in our capillaries, or the protein in our blood that keeps fluid inside our capillaries, is albumin. So, albumin is what makes that sucking pressure that we see over here that sucks fluid back in the capillaries. So if we have any condition where we don't have albumin, we can't suck the fluid back in the capillaries and we get edema. So an example of this would be liver damage, because remember, our liver makes albumin. If you're malnourished, you don't eat protein. Albumin is a protein. So if you don't have protein, you can't make protein. That would be another example where you see edema, like in the kwashiorkor, in the children in foreign countries. That's an example of that. Another example is nephrotic syndrome. Minimal change disease is when we see in young children who have an albumin-only loss of protein through their kidneys because of damage to the podocytes in their kidneys. That's another example. They don't have the albumin, they don't have that sucking pressure, they end up with edema. So the other thing, of course, we have to think about that's really important to cause edema is our other pressure that will cause fluid to be pushed out of the capillary, and that is our sucking pressure in the interstitium. So how do we get more protein in our interstitium? Well, the answer to that is inflammation. Inflammation, or any kind of lymphatic obstruction, causes proteins to accumulate into our interstitium. Those proteins, what do? They're a particle. They suck. So they're going to suck fluid out and therefore cause edema. The only other factor that I really want you to focus on is our KF, or our filtration constant. What this means is how leaky our capillaries are. The more holes a capillary has in it, the more likely you're going to leak out and get edema. And the biggest example of something I can give you that does this is histamine. Histamine pokes holes into our capillaries in order to allow more permeability for white blood cells to get in and fight infection. So therefore, we see edema and swelling whenever we have inflammation and release of histamine. Inflammation has two factors: the histamine increasing vascular permeability, as well as the increased protein in the interstitium, which is going to cause fluid to be sucked out. So this is just a quick example of Starling forces. Hopefully this helped and made things make a little more sense. As long as you remember that anything with fluid is hydrostatic pressure, and that pushes things away, and anything that is a particle or a protein is oncotic, and it sucks things towards, you should be okay. That's the basic principle. And hopefully this will help somebody out and you'll do great on your boards. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up in the comments.